Welcome to the UCSF Sports Medicine Podcast, 6 to 8 weeks, Perspectives in Medicine. During our program, we continue to cover a variety of hot topics in the sports medicine world and more.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of 6 to 8 weeks. It's me, Brian Feely, along with Drew Lansdowne. Today we're going to talk about the application season and where applicants choose to apply for a residency. So even if you're not a medical student or you haven't gone through it, this is really a fascinating process. So what happens is if you're a medical student entering your final year, you are applying to go where you want to go for residency. So that's anywhere between 3 or even sometimes 7 years for your next step of training. It's called being a resident because way back when people would live in residence in the hospital, transition to the equally unappealing house officer, and where you would live someplace in the hospital while you did this residency. So part of this process is you go through these evaluations where your application is sent into these programs, and then you are selected to interview at these processes. This is made particularly more complicated by the fact that you have a relatively small pool of, or a relatively large pool of people applying to a relatively small number of spots, especially for the more competitive ones and the ones we're interested in, such as orthopedic surgery. So in the fall, what people do is they do away rotations. They're thinking about where they want to go, and it's essentially an audition. And following that, they start making these lists of where they want to apply. These lists can become pretty long, and here's some interesting stats. So for orthopedic surgery, there were 1,435 applications for only 875 spots in 2022. So that equates to 1.6 applicants per every position. And of the about 1,068, exactly 1,068 U.S. medical senior medical students who applied, that meant 365 didn't match. It also means that people are applying to more and more spots. In 2018, people applied to 68 programs, and in 2022, they applied to almost 90. Each one of these is both expensive and it's an iterative amount of work. And then on the flip side, the more people that apply, the more files that the program directors and the people that evaluate this have to look through, which means you can be inundated with lots of really good candidates and fail to pick that person who would be perfect to your program. Now, why this is equally fascinating. There's a match process that was developed because we wanted a fair process for people to get into the residencies of their choice. So it used to be where until about World War II, residencies would sign students early on, often a couple years early if they were talented, just to make sure they filled their residency spots. And you can think about that as kind of like a high school freshman signing early on to play at Duke. If they were really that talented, Duke would rather sign them early than risk not being able to get them later. Well, that changed, but then what got particularly complicated is when we decided to allow couples to enter matches together, because you wouldn't want, the husband to go to one program and the wife to be shipped across the country or vice versa. So this is such a complicated process that the people who developed this and got it to run correctly, Lloyd Shapley and Alvin Roth, built this algorithm, and they were actually awarded in part for this and the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2012. So today what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about one of the key matches or key parts of this match process, figuring out where to apply. We'll cover how many programs, although as we'll talk about, it's kind of hard to figure that out, how to decide where not to interview, which programs to signal, which is a new process, and what else you can do right now, kind of in the fall, if you're thinking about applying. So Drew, as a associate program director, if you're giving advice to one of your medical students, what do you tell them about numbers in terms of where to apply to or how many to apply to?
Yeah, so I think this is such a hard question at this point. And, like you said, the average number of programs that applicants are applying to is about 90. I think when I applied, which I don't think is that long ago, I think it was 50 something, and I applied to, I think, 53. And this is something that on a system side, like we have a problem like this, that you have to apply to like 90, 100 places. This is something that we need to solve and improve. And part of that could be the applicants just applying to fewer places, like saying, hey, you really need to be more selective. You need to just apply to the ones you're interested in, and then let everybody do the same, and then we'll have a better process. But that's not going to work. Like if you advise somebody, hey, just pick 20 and apply there, or just pick 10, like think really hard and pick the 10 you're most interested in. And if they don't match, they've gone into the process almost with one hand tied behind their back and like placing themselves at just a disadvantage from the start. So I think realistically for applicants, I would apply to that average number right now. And it's crazy. I think it's the wrong thing to do. But I think with the way the system is right now, I think that's probably what you have to do. And then hopefully we should work to like improve the system would be on the other side. But I think on the individual applicant level, I think at this point you have to apply broadly because of those statistics. What do you tell people?
I tell them that I don't know, because I think, like you said, it's really hard. I think right now, I think there's a lot of different things to factor. And usually my conversation with them depends a little bit on what their file looks like. If their file is absolutely amazing, they are the top 1 or 2 people in their class, I tell them that they are probably safe to apply to somewhere between 30 and 50. But there are some caveats that if they really want to go only in one location, that one location is so important for them, they can apply to fewer programs because the location is that important. And they are not going to consider that spot in, I'm just going to throw it out there, Minnesota. They're just not going to go to where it's cold, no matter how good of a program it is. If you're really not going to consider it, don't apply there. I think one thing backing up, people don't know this, the not matching, it can be really scary. So what happens to somebody who's a medical student? So you've gone through college, you did great in college. You had already gone through high school and did great in high school. Now you went through medical school, you may be in the top 5% of your class, and then you may not match. So you don't get a job after, looking at probably 8 years post high school, maybe even 10 years post high school education. You finish and it's like, well, shoot, I don't have a job. Nobody wants to take me. It's humiliating. It's infuriating. And it's not like you're a bad person. You are the really, really smart person that deserves a shot. We just don't have enough of those shots to give right now. So when you don't match, you end up with this conundrum of, do I scramble, it's literally called the scramble, into another field that may not be your first choice? Or do you try to improve your application, but then you have really only a short amount of like 3 to 4 months to really boost up that application. And those weak points may be not something that you can necessarily, you can't necessarily solve in the next few months of doing research or doing a couple extra rotations. I think the other thing that's really important is cost. So the other thing I talk to applicants about is, how much money do you have? And just to be blunt, can you take out loans, or is it going to be crippling to you? The average cost of applications, just applications, is $2,000. If you can afford it, frankly, at this point, you apply to the average amount and apply to 80 or 90, a few less if you're geographically constrained. But keep in mind that that's only a drop in the bucket.
Well, and then each application that you add on adds additional cost.
Right.
And I think for a lot of people, it's kind of faced with, well, do I spend an extra $100, $500, or do I kind of roll the dice and like maybe my future in this field is altered because I just didn't apply to, 31 instead of 30. And I think the match offers a lot of advantages to the applicants. I think it should be better than the way it used to be, but I think it's still a system that has some holes and can be tough to navigate.
Well, to be fair, I don't think that's the match process. I think it's an application process that's the challenge.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Well, I think, and going back to that paper, you're looking at a cost of somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 just to try to get your first job, which is insane when you think about it, because most of these students are also in debt. And whereas I think that there is some benefits that some programs still are on Zoom, even that's a challenge, because there's this thought that, well, if you're offering a Zoom interview versus an in-person interview, well, maybe the people on Zoom aren't going to want to come there as much. There's no proof of that whatsoever, but there's no way to convince applicants that we're not going to be biased against that. So I think in terms of, are we going to answer this question? How many programs? I think you try to hit the average and hope that program directors find a way to decrease the number of programs. I mean, I heard one suggestion, which was you limit it. You pick 50 and you cannot go over 50. And, at first I was like, well, that's so unfair. But really, how often do you go down to like, I really went to spot 50 and that's where I matched? I'm not sure how often that happens.
Right.
Okay. So next question. When you talk to applicants about where to apply and you're choosing different programs, let's say you're trying to pick out that list of where to apply that you really, really want to go to. And this comes up because once you start receiving those interviews, a great applicant is going to get maybe a quarter of them. Because let's say when Drew Lansdowne applied, lots of research, competitive high school baseball player, played, okay.
Showed up.
Competitive little league baseball player, done a lot of really cool stuff. You're still going to be rejected by a majority of programs because a lot of programs didn't read the file closely enough. Unfortunately, that happens. They said, well, this person isn't going to come out here. This person isn't the right fit for what we have in this program. So how do you recommend thinking about what's important and less important when you're talking to applicants?
Yeah, I think, one good starting point is if there is a geographic location that matters to the applicant, then that can really help narrow things down from the start. And, that can be, where family is. That could be maybe, a lot of residents will end up in the area that they do their residency training. And some of that's probably just that, you wanted to go there to that area for training. There's something that drew you there. So that's a, better chance that you're in that area afterwards. But, if you say, I want to be on the East Coast, then, you're already looking at a more narrow subset. There are, I think, different degrees. The other thing in that location too is if you have a partner, significant other, for some people it's, they're couples matching. So, through that same process. And then for others, it's, opportunities outside of medicine. So there will be some locations that facilitate, their partner's aspirations and others where it's not going to be possible for them. So it's probably not worth looking at that spot as closely. And then I think, within programs, there are varying degrees of, academic opportunities. So for some people, like that, basic science research, clinical research, those can be distinguishing factors. And then other people, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but that might not be what they're looking for. And they say, I want a primarily clinically focused program that doesn't really prioritize research. And there are some programs that have more of that slant. And then I think there are a number of features outside of just the, the core clinical training. For instance, at UCSF, there's a strong international orthopedics program, and that's pretty unique. And I think we draw a number of applicants who have, a strong interest there. And a lot of programs you can do it, but if you have that well-developed program, it just makes it much easier. There's things like, a research year. So if you say, well, I want to be in academics, I think both of you and I did an extra year during residency. And I think that, undoubtedly helped me transition into that faculty position. But, there are some places that have those opportunities and are, really beneficial if that's the direction you're heading. And then I think, different programs also have just a different approach to education, just a different, model of teaching. Like some are, like a mentorship model where you're kind of consistently working with one person. Some are like a, just that specific subspecialty area. And I think that's where like applicants, it helps if they're, good at understanding where they will excel and kind of what their needs are for development. And then, if this is the model that I'm going to flourish in, then really targeting those types of programs.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I like to think about it when I'm counseling people on where to interview. I think even though I would love to say you should go to the best program for you, regardless of location, I chose to be within 20 minutes of an ocean because I also wanted to be 20 minutes from an ocean. And it was important for family stuff to be close to where we could raise kids. So I think it's important to look at, number one, what's your family unit and where is that location going to be most happy? Some people have no constraints. Fine. If you have a constraint, be upfront about it and acknowledge it and embrace it. If you have your partner really wants to be in a major metropolitan area because they are a lawyer and they need access to law firms that are going to be in major metropolitan areas, then you prioritize that when you're choosing where to interview. And then I think the second most important is flavor of program that you're looking for. Are you looking for a program that has a large academic component? Are you looking for one that has a lot of residents per class? Are you looking for a mentorship model like Mayo, where you track one attending for 12 weeks? And then that kind of is the second tier. And then the third thing is, what are you looking for in terms of that +1 type thing? Are you looking for a program that has strong international health, that one that does an extra amount of pediatric orthopedic surgery? And that's really the flavor that you're looking for. Or is there one that has a strong tie to doing sports medicine and covering college sports? Like, those are all things that I think are important. They're lower tier, especially when you're thinking about where to interview, but they are things that you should start making that list of what's important. And I think it's important to start thinking about, for your own education and development, what really is important to you when you're trying to think about where 5 years from you wants to be. Now, one thing that comes up, and this comes up at every level of education, there are those programs that are named in US News and World Reports for whether it's colleges, for med school, for residencies, for where to go when you have a heart attack. How important do you think prestige of programs is?
I think
actually
probably
I'm going to rephrase that.
Okay.
What do you think? Because that's not a fair question. What do you think is it about a program that prestige matters for them?
I mean, some of that prestige, it is on the patient side and kind of marketing your services to patients. I mean, I do think, having like thought leaders in your residency program, people who are, really driving the field forward, those are all important things. And I think sometimes the rankings can capture some of that, but it's also subjective though. And I think that there's a moderately sized group of programs around the country where you can develop great orthopedic surgeons at any of them. And then I do also think that there are some places where the same person, they may not reach the same level because the resources they need are not at that place.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that.
I think that's a great point, that's a fit thing, that you could have been a better orthopedic surgeon either at a more prestigious program or at a quote unquote less prestigious program that fit your needs better.
Right. Yeah. And then I think, there are like some opportunities that probably come with the bigger programs, but like there's so much development, and like there are, if you're not getting what you need to accelerate, then you might not derive that same benefit that someone else would.
Yeah. And I think it's so hard. And I think that's that kind of that gut feeling that people have sometimes, like, this seems like a good program. Now, when you're choosing where to interview, it's really hard because it's a lot of word of mouth. It's a lot of looking on the internet and doing dives into places like Reddit. And there was this famous Google Doc that went around before that was, honestly pretty disparaging about a lot of programs. But realistically, when you look at the data, prestige matters if you want an academic job. Like, you are more likely to get an academic job if you're in one of those so-called prestigious programs, which kind of makes sense. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're at Hospital for Special Surgery for residency, you're surrounded by people that publish a lot of different papers. They have more contacts. You're more likely to stay in academics. that doesn't make you a better orthopedic surgeon. It doesn't make you better with your hands. It doesn't make you better at talking with patients, relating with patients, educating patients. It doesn't make you a better person when you go home to your family. It just means that you may have a few more academic opportunities. And for some people, that's really important. And some people, it's not so much. And I think, especially when you're thinking about when you're building the rank list, that place that you had, like, oh my goodness, this is the place that felt like home to me, is a really important feeling.
Yeah, I think when I was doing my away rotations, one thing I found really interesting, I rotated at my home medical school and then two other places. And the chief resident that I worked with closely on each rotation, they all had matched into the same pediatric fellowship. And so I was looking at these different programs in very different areas of the country with different structures. And it's like, but they're all going to the exact same place, which was, like one of the, probably the best pediatric fellowship in the country. And it was like, at that moment, it really hit me, like, there are different paths there, but they're all achieving the same. And then their personalities are different. And I think their experience, some would have enjoyed other places, differently than others, and learn more in different situations. So.
Yeah. And it really is. Unfortunately, it's just like college. It's just like med school. It's just like anything else in life. It's the effort you put into it when no one's really watching that's going to make you good at what you do. It's the extra work training to be a surgeon. It's the extra work doing all the reading to be a lawyer. It isn't the institution that you're in. It's what you make out of that institution. And that those opportunities are going to be anywhere. Now, something that's come up relatively recently is this idea of signaling. And our producer, Andrew, who is applying this year, and said that this is really important for the people that are applying this year, is because mainly it's new and people aren't sure what to make of it. And for those of us that don't know, and I'm not entirely sure how it works, which is probably one of the inherent problems either with my brain or the system in general, is that these signals, where it's kind of like a star on your email, like these are the important emails, it helps to showcase candidates who are very serious about a certain residency program. Only applicants can send program signals. We can't send it the other way. We can't say, like, wink, wink, Andrew, we're really interested in you. Bob, you didn't get a signal. Grace, you got a half star, so we're sort of interested in you. The use of program signals is also optional for applicants. So if you don't fill out any of them, we don't know that you didn't signal anybody. Now, do you think that programs know what to do with this at this point?
Not really well. I think it gives us an idea that, that person has some interest in the program. But I think the best interest is always, rotating as a sub. Like, that's your indicator of, like, the strongest amount of interest. And then when it's like, hey, I'm one of like 20 programs, I don't know how strongly that comes across all the time. I think for where it does help probably is, if you're coming from a different geographic area, maybe a lesser known program, and, if you're sending that signal to that, like, it's like, hey, there's a reason I want to be there. Like, I think that might play a larger role. I think at some of the bigger programs, I think most people are signaling, and it may not be a differentiator.
Yeah, I was trying to think about scenarios where I think it would be a real difference maker for me. And I would agree with you. If it's somebody who is really trying to prioritize geographic location, like, I have a reason to be in Southern California, you signal all those programs as a priority. Philosophically, I think it's important to realize that we're still going to take, if you are a decent candidate and we think that your candidacy looks really good and we want to bring you out for an interview and you didn't signal, challenge accepted. I'll drag you out here and convince you that you should be here. We won't look at it as like, oh, they didn't signal us. That probably means that they're really not that interested. But other programs may use it differently. So I would take it seriously. Right. I think it is a work in progress. It's not going to be the end all and be all, though. Like, if you have an outstanding application and you don't signal somebody, you're still decent chance, but decent for this means a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance that you get an interview. you can signal to your heart's content if you are a horrible applicant, no offense, you're still going to struggle to get interviews.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is a good opportunity to really think, within that list, which ones, am I most interested in? I would use it. I would send them. And the other thing is that the programs that you don't signal, they don't know how many signals you've sent. So it's not like, oh, you're not even in my top 25. I'm not going to interview you. I think from a program, and it's still, see who the applicants are that look like would be the best for that program. And that's like one.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because you look at how many you can signal. I think ortho allows 20 to 25. Other subspecialties, you can signal 2, 3, 4. So it is very different. So it also means we're still learning how to use it. It may not even be here in 5 years. To wrap up, in terms of choosing for interviews, choose a lot right now. Choose based on what you think is really important, whether that's program flavor, what additional things programs offer. Do your research. If you think that there's absolutely no way you're going to a program, don't apply there. Like, it's not going to help. It's your time. It's your money. And then you take the signaling with a grain of salt, but signal the programs you look at and say, gosh, I really want to go there, but no harm, no foul. If you miss one, we're most likely not going to grade you differently because you didn't, if you're a good applicant. Is that all fair?
Right. I think so. I think it's good advice.
Yeah. So this fall, I think we're going to do some more on kind of what program directors are looking for. We're going to talk a little bit about what people are interested in when we're trying to build a CV, how important research is, those creative activity, how much grades matter, especially because the landscape is really changing as we move more to performative evaluations rather than actual grades and numbers. So you can find out more about this at 6to8weekspodcast.com. If you have any questions, comments, please drop us a line either on social media or through our website, and we will do our best to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the UCSF Sports Medicine Podcast, 6 to 8 weeks, Perspectives in Medicine. What do you think of this topic? Connect with us now. In addition to finding our contact form, you'll also find our social media links in our entire 6 to 8 weeks episode archive. Help us grow our listenership by liking, subscribing, and sharing everywhere. We're eager to hear from you, and we'll be sending you more great thought-provoking content in less than 6 to 8 weeks.